A very warm welcome to the new episode of Indian Insights. This is your host Sumit Sharma Samir. This is a Nepal-based podcast, and if you are interested listening to the thought leaders from around the world, please subscribe to my channel. I'm extremely pleased to welcome 2022 Booker Prize winner Shehan Karunatilaka in my program today. Shehan gained international recognition with his debut novel Chinaman: The Legend of Pradeep Matthew. The book won several awards, including the Commonwealth Book Prize, the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature, and the Gratian Prize. His second novel, The Seven Moons of Mali Almeida, cemented his reputation as a literary powerhouse. It won the 2022 Booker Prize, making Karunatilake the second Sri Lankan author to receive this honor after Michael Ondaatje. Sehan's journey from advertising and music to becoming a globally recognized author showcases his versatility and resilience. His works remain essential reading for those seeking a deeper understanding of Sri Lanka's history and its place in the global literary landscape. Sen, it's such an honor to have you in my show. Welcome to the Indian Insights with Sharma Samir.
Oh, thank you very much.
Sen, it's very interesting that you call yourself a failed rock star and a failed cricketer before becoming a writer. Can you please tell us about your journey in music and cricket?
Not much of a journey. I played some cricket this afternoon with my kids. It was, yeah, I won then. Yeah, I played, I mean, up till under 15 level. I think cricket, I used to bowl left arm spin, left arm Chinaman. I had a decent googly. But,
Wonderful.
I was lazy. I bowl one good ball, three full tosses, get smashed.
Wow.
And yeah, my fielding and my batting, I used to bat for 20 overs, score 20 runs. I was one of those old school opening batters. But, I always fantasized about being a great cricketer. And I guess I ended up writing about being a great, in my 30s when there was no hope of me ever playing for Sri Lanka. Um,
Hmm.
I imagined what it would be like. So I think what I'm trying to say is all those teenage afternoons, Saturdays, Sundays wasted standing at third man fielding.
Right.
It wasn't wasted. In the end, I drew on that to write a book. With the music, I don't know. I played in bands in my 20s,
Wow.
made a lot of noise. But now, after COVID, I've started becoming a musician again in that for no
Wonderful.
ulterior motive. I play piano and drums. My son's playing drums, so I like making noise, and it's a good procrastination from writing. But I
Right.
think, I guess the point, if there is a point to this, is that, you try out everything and you don't have to be, yeah, gold medal at everything you do. But, every failure, some things, yeah, you may not be good at, but I think you can draw from those failures if you want to call them failures. So, yeah, that's why I put that in
Absolutely.
my in my website. But
But
my
I
kids are there
really love
trying out
that.
everything that cricket and rugby and all swimming and all of this stuff. And now I have to drive them. Me and my wife have to drive them to all these classes. That's so I get the writing done in the morning. But my point is, yeah, doesn't matter if they're not great at it. As long as you try out as many different things and yeah, learn from your failures, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fun. I mean, it's always good to try different things that you love and passionate about. And when
Hmm.
is that you really decided to commit full time to your writing, and how did it all started?
Well, I think this is the difference. I always wrote. So I always, even as a teenager, kept diaries and yeah, I'd read and maybe just write reviews of books or movies or albums. Back then, we used to buy tapes and CDs, and so I always wrote, even though I had my aspirations were, yeah, maybe I wanted to play sport or adolescent aspirations, play in a band. I never practiced guitar every day, but I wrote every day, and I think that's
Okay.
maybe if there is a lesson again, is that the thing you do every day defines you. And I think by the time I was 30, I I'd read enough and I'd written enough that I was able to start writing. But of course, I wrote for a living anyway. I worked as an advertising copywriter,
Yeah.
up till, I mean, I still take on work and I do that. And even though now the game has changed and the technology has changed and all of that, you're still sitting there with a blank paper trying to come up with a headline for a billboard, for a a print ad now for one of these scrolling, ads or content as they call it now. And so I that whole craft, I think working in advertising, you have to be creative every day. You can't say I'm having writer's block, I'm having the inspiration is not there. Client is coming this evening. You better have some ideas. You better have a script. You better have a headline. And so that idea that you have to, even when you don't feel like it, you have to sit down and come up with stuff. I think that helped me when I eventually, because eventually you do get sick of your job when you work in the corporate field. I think the older you get, you think, why am I don't want to work my weekend for this pitch for this client that, is probably not going to even. We've all been through our corporate nightmares, and I thought, okay, I'm going to try writing, and I had this idea about this cricketer, this great mythical cricketer who played for Sri Lanka, but who nobody noticed and nobody remembers. And I used to just wake up every morning because I was working a job like 4 o'clock and write for 2, 3 hours. And in that time, I would force myself to, even when I didn't feel like it, write. So I wouldn't I think that's when I see a lot of beginner writers, they say, yeah, I've got an idea. And I'm like, please don't tell me your idea, but maybe they eventually tell you. And it's a good idea. Obviously, everyone has good ideas, but then that's not the tough part. The tough part is writing the first 100, 200 pages of that. And to do that, you can't just work on, and a lot of them say, I'm going to take a month off and go and sit on the beach and write my novel. And, I said that, but, you take a month, you're going to sit on the beach. You're not going to write any novels. You're going to, maybe last day you might write something and it'll be crap. And it's a long distance. It's a marathon, writing novels.
Right.
Even writing a story takes me about 6 months.
True.
So I think, yeah, I got the idea from advertising that I turn up every day and I write. And I wrote this morning, wrote yesterday, I'll write tomorrow. And so I think that's all that. So then by the time I was in my 30s, I was ready to at least devote myself to at least finishing one novel. And so that's been the journey, but it doesn't get easier. Sadly, even after prizes, after all of that, the third book is not going to write itself. And so I'm back to the challenge of one page, one paragraph at a time. Yeah.
Right. Shehan, and this your work, Chinaman, the legend of Pradeep Matthew, is often hailed as one of the greatest cricket novels. What inspired you to come up with this work?
Well, firstly, that there wasn't that many cricket novels. I was very surprised because cricket, it's an obsession in your part of the world, in my part of the world, and even though Sri Lanka were, it's only after 1996 we won a World Cup. Suddenly, it became a bigger than a religion over here, and so also the world noticed us. But I just realized when I started writing, because I started Sri Lankan literature again, I think early 2000s, 90s, there were a lot of Sri Lankans writing, and I started reading other people's work, and I realized every Sri Lankan story seemed to be about the war, about Sinhala Tamil. Maybe it was a star-crossed love story. A lot of that was Tamil boy, Sinhala girl, what's going to happen, or it's a war story. But the ethnic conflict, the history was always very much part of that narrative, or someone who's been had to flee the country and now is overseas dealing with their trauma. But I thought, okay, why not cricket? Because, okay, yeah, we've had this war, which at that time didn't look like it was ever going to end. But surely Sri Lanka, there's more stories. Why doesn't anyone write a story about Sri Lankan cricket where, we achieved these great heights, but it has also been through its many dramatic times. And so that was just, I thought it'd be a short story, an idea about this genius who played for Sri Lanka in the 80s and for whatever reason was never noticed. But then I gathered more cricket stories. I interviewed ex-cricketers, interviewed my uncles, and that's where maybe I got the narrator, the old drunken sports journalist telling this story. But like with everything, it evolved. And after a while, I realized I'll have to quit my job now and do this full time. And I became a freelancer, and I spent about 3 years writing this. But also, I didn't have any illusions that it was going to be who's going to read a book about a Sri Lankan left arm leg spinner who played in 1985? It didn't seem like maybe now there's a lot of interest in South Asian literature, and there's a lot of books on the shelf, but that wasn't always the case. But I just thought I'd be interested to read a book like that. I'd be interested to see what became of Pradeep Matthew and why he didn't become famous and where he was now. And also I fell in love with the narrator W.G. Karunasena, this washed up journalist, drinking himself to death, but trying to find this beautiful cricketer before he dies. And so I just got wrapped up in the story. But I think that's the thing. Find a story that you get obsessed with, and also a story that's fun to research, because it was a lot of fun to research that story. I just had to watch Sri Lankan cricket matches on YouTube and hang out with drunken uncles in the afternoon and talk cricket with them, and it was a pleasure doing that research. Yeah.
Another novel, The Seven Moons of Mali Almeida.
Yeah, so the thing about you write your first novel, you don't think about, or at least I didn't think about what's your second novel, third novel. I just thought, okay, let me try my best and see if it gets published. For me, the goal was just if I could get it published in the subcontinent, in India, outside of Sri Lanka, that'll be a victory. But of course, as you know, the book traveled further than that, and it won some prizes. And then suddenly people were asking, what are you doing for your second book? And by that stage, I was working in advertising in Singapore. I just got married. And I wasn't, but of course, I always wanted to write another one. But at that stage, I was sick of cricket. I was sick of talking about cricket because um, at that stage, Sri Lankan cricket was going through a bit of a decline. And I thought, let me write something completely different with no sport in it. And of course, I also grew up watching horror movies around the same time in the 80s. And, I still enjoy a ghost story. That'll be an interesting way. And maybe I was a bit old, and also you got to realize the war ended. The war ended in 2009. So suddenly we had this closed chapter of this war. And number not closed, obviously some wounds are still healing.
Yeah.
And at that time, I remember there was a lot of debate. We thought, my generation, I grew up in the 80s, the war started then and it continued all through my life. We thought, okay, now Sri Lanka will be unstoppable. We'll have this, the country, everyone will come back, build this country. But of course, that's not what happened. We know the last 10 years have been as turbulent, if not as violent. And this narrative of whose fault, how many civilians were killed, whose fault was it, whose fault was the war, and people were just blaming each other, but there was no real, actually that's not true. There was reconciliation, there was rehabilitation, there was all of that. But maybe I just felt that rather than laying blame, they could look to healing some of the crime and solving some of the unsolved crimes. So that's where this idea for this ghost story, I thought, okay, forget the people who are alive. They don't know what they're talking about or they have their agendas. Let's talk, if we could talk to the ghosts, the dead, the victims of Sri Lanka's wars, what would they have to say about the war, about the country? And that's what got me started. It was initially called Chats with the Dead. It was an interview, a journalist going to the afterlife, interviewing dead people whose murders had not been solved. And the fact is, a lot of Sri Lankan murders are not solved. And all the ghosts in Seven Moons are based on, I fictionalized it, but based on an unsolved murder case, political or not, in the late 80s. So very different subject matter. So I thought at the very least, people won't just think I'm a sports writer. At least I can move into that territory. But again, by that stage, I'd had two small kids and, family life, and I was working a job. And so it took a longer time, but it was the same principle. I just woke up early and I wrote every day. And 7 years later, it was finished. And then Sri Lanka went through a massive economic collapse, crisis, and people are on the street, protests. And in the midst of this, I get a call saying, hey, we've been longlisted for the Booker Prize. And then things kind of shifted after that. It happened slowly, but shortlisted, and then finally won in the midst of this kind of petrol strike and the president tried. Sri Lanka's in turmoil and I'm winning this prize. And anyway, Sri Lanka's a lot better now. again, it's amazing. It's like the Sri Lankan cricket team, right? They'll collapse for all out for less than 100, and then suddenly they'll do something amazing and score a six on the last ball and win a match. And so it's been a turbulent time. But yeah, so that was the genesis. From cricket, I went to this very strange ghost story. But I think maybe again you got to count luck as well. That time where Sri Lanka was collapsing, this story came out and won this prize. And it's only now I've recovered. Now 2 years later, as you can see, I'm sitting here surrounded by books and writing every day. But yeah.
तिमीसँग अब धेरै टाइम छैन है बिहे गर्नु छ भने गरिहाल नत्र घरबाट मलाई अन्तै बिहे गरिदिनु
भर्खर 3 वर्ष भयो एमबीबीएस जोइन गरेको 5 वर्षको कोर्स हो के भो अचम्म छ एक्सक्युज मी सर मेरो 5 वर्षको कोर्स 3 वर्षमा सकाउन मिल्दैन
गेट आउट
हेलो
के सोच्यौ त
के सोच्ने मैले प्रिन्सिपलसँग पनि कुरा गरिसके 3 वर्षमा पनि के हुन्छ 3 वर्षमा
के भयो भाइ ल बस साउजी एक कप चिया कसले भन्यो 3 वर्षमा केही हुँदैन भनेर यो हेर एलआईसी नेपालको धनवृष्टि योजनामा 3 वर्षमा पैसा फिर्ता हुन्छ
ए हो र
जीवन बीमाको साथमा धनवृष्टि 3 वर्षमा एलआईसी नेपालको धनवृष्टि योजना एलआईसी नेपाल
warm services to delight your senses, taking hospitality to newer heights. Nepal Airlines.
Sen, I mean, we honestly we have been watching pretty closely about both Sri Lankan cricket. I mean, I also grew up at the same time watching some of the best shots displayed by Arvinda De Silva and Sanath Jayasuriya. The opener batsmen like Kalu Vitarna. I mean, those were the days, right, in the cricket. We also saw, the civil war pretty closely, and the kind of society we are, and we are also come out with the Maoist war, and we are also going through the healing. So we can completely relate to what you are saying, both in cricket and both in the in the post-conflict context. But how did winning the 2022 Booker?
Sorry to interrupt you. So, no, I just wanted to add that right after I won, Pokhara Festival was the first festival that I went to in December, I think, 2022. And, I spoke with many writers there and made many friends there. And, we are talking about how very similar, not just our countries, but South Asia, that we don't talk about our past. And there are unsolved mysteries and crimes and all of that, sometimes it's quite dangerous to talk about if you're a journalist. And what I realize is fiction writers, that's something we can maybe go use a story, use a fictionalized version to address our past, because sometimes it can be dangerous being a journalist and if you're reporting about these things. And so I just want to mention that because we had a great time. My family was in Pokhara and we had great conversation.
Glad to know that. And how did winning the 2022 Booker Prize change your career and personal life?
Well, personal life, I mean, I'm still married, but still the kids are a bit older, better behaved. And I'm back in the same house I was living in and all of that. And, trying to keep writing. And so hopefully, the basics of my life, I bought a few more guitars and I bought a drum kit. Nice. But, other than that, I'm pretty sensible. I don't have, I'm not going to go to a casino or buy a Lamborghini or go crazy like that anyway. It was, but so basic. What I'm saying is there were 2 years of craziness, 2 years of where you're invited to every festival, and doing interviews, talking about the book. And that's the irony that the book does well. I mean, the book's been translated into 30 plus languages. It's wow. Done well, and it's may even be made into a film. And there's all that stuff. Which, I mean, Chinaman, my first book was, I think, a pretty good book. There are some people who say we prefer Chinaman to the new one, and they may be right. But I worked as hard on that book, and it did okay. I mean, it did all right, but I still had to work, and I think that's the experience for most writers. We work, put our heart and soul, our mind and our bodies into these books, and they come out. And most books, they you might get a couple of checks here and there, but we keep writing. We keep writing, hoping that one day one book might make it. But that's not the reward. And most of us, I'd say 90% of writers, we work day jobs. We work as journalists, as professors, as copywriters in my case, but we do the writing because for some reason it's important for us to do it. Maybe it's a compulsion, maybe it's a mental disease that you're compelled to write every day. So that was my reality for the last 15 years. And I was quite at peace with it. I thought, I can, until the robots take over copywriting, which is going to happen soon. It hasn't happened yet, but I can still find work. I can still, earn a living and write my books. And so the pressure was in my mind off that I thought, okay, doesn't matter. I've written this book. Maybe it'll sell, maybe it won't. I'll write another one and I'll write another one. That was where I was at. But of course, this prize came along, and the change is that, the book has been widely read, and it's my next book. I'm not going to struggle to find a publisher, whereas with every book, I've always struggled. I've always had to work hard to find a publisher, even if I'm so-called established. So now all that is there. Mm-hmm. But in the end, the third book's not going to write itself, like I say. I've still got to go back to silence all the voices in my head, forget that there are people waiting to read the book, and just write the book that has it as it has to be written, as it reveals itself to you and all of that. So look, it's been great. It's been great. But you can't lose sight of the fact that, go back to the day job and work hard and do the thing. But it's been a good 2 years.
Your novels have gained global recognition while being deeply rooted in Sri Lankan history. How do you ensure they resonate with both local and international readers?
So that's the challenge. And like I say, maybe that's why it's going to be challenging now, because first two books, I had no expectation that it's going to be read in New York or Paris or London. I was like, this is about a Sri Lankan cricketer. Maybe fans of Sri Lankan cricket may be interested in it. Let me just write for them. And first draft, you always write for readers like yourself. But it got edited. Both books got edited once we had a publishing deal with the UK or the US. There was always talk, okay, you need to now edit it. Some of these references won't be understood outside the subcontinent. So I've always had to do that, which is a bit strange. Like even Seven Moons was Chats with the Dead. It came out just before COVID. And again, it didn't do much. I think also COVID, there were other things happening with the world, but it got reviewed a couple of times, but really struggled to find a UK publisher. And so therefore I rewrote it. Now, I don't mind it. Like there's some writers who are artists who are saying, I've written it. I'm not changing another word. If you don't like it, screw you. That's an honorable position. But I come from advertising position where a client changes your copy every day. Every day you write something, you send it, comes back. No, can we mention this? Can we mention that? That we don't like that word. And so I've developed a thick skin. Okay, fine. When you're young, you curse the client, curse yourself, and you throw a tantrum when you already said, okay, fine. Let me see if I can make it better. And so that's been the spirit with the novels as well. Of course, it's much more complex editing a 300-page novel than a 30-second commercial, but it's the same principle. You have to sort of imagine that, yes, I can make it better with every revision. So with Seven Moons, I spent 2 years rewriting the thing. It's the same book as Chats with the Dead, but I think it's a much better book because also for me, the measure of a good book is that if you know nothing about the author or the country or the context, you should still be able to have an experience with it. And that was my goal for both books. If you know nothing about Sri Lankan cricket or Sri Lanka's civil war, which let's face it, most of the world doesn't, you should still be able to have a human experience with the book. And hopefully that's true because the book has gone to places where, Eastern Europe and South America, where they don't know who Ranatunga or Jayasuriya were, but still they understand the idea that old men are obsessed with sport and old men sometimes behave badly with their wife and their kids, but they're obsessed. I think that idea is a universal idea. And this idea that belief in ghosts, there are ghost stories in every culture. And there's also injustices in every culture, and this idea that a ghost is avenging an injustice. I don't think you need to understand the intricacies of the Civil War to do that. So I think that's initially the first draft you write for your audience, which is presumably people like you, your people from your country, your region. Then when you revise, you think of it more universally. I mean, easier said than done. I wish I could write a book every year like Stephen King or Lee Child, I wish those guys just smash them out. Every time you go to a bookshop, there's a new Stephen King and a new short story collection. And me, I don't know. I take 7 years. I don't know. Hopefully,
Right.
next one I'll do 2 years. Maybe every
And
World Cup
sir,
I'll have a book. That I'll be happy with that. Yeah.
right. And Sri Lanka has a a rich literary tradition. Which Sri Lankan authors do you think deserve more international attention?
Oh wow, there is now this is another thing to be celebrating, and I'm sure it's the case with Nepali literature or with the region. In the 80s, there wasn't a Sri Lankan section in the bookshop. There wasn't. I mean, there were Sri Lankan books, very few, kind of cheaply produced, um, self-published. But now you walk into a bookshop, even in Singapore, there will be a Sri Lankan shelf. There'll be a Sri Lankan section because we have. I mean, obviously, we've had a very interesting, turbulent last few decades. So there's plenty of stories, but also maybe there's a generation of writers who've grown up. So I'll mention the classics. Ondaatje, Michael Ondaatje, Ramesh Gunasekara, Shyam Selvadurai. These were the guys writing in the 90s, and who really told us that Carl Muller is another. So Carl Muller would be my first. He was writing in the 90s, wrote The Jam Fruit Tree and that Burger trilogy, not as well known as the other guys who were internationally published, but he wrote about this burger, which is descendants of, the Portuguese, Dutch, English colonizers. They look like, I think Angelo Matthews, Russell Arnold, are they burger? They look like Sri Lankans, but they have these names. Van Kulenberg and Carl Muller and all that. But he was writing this story about the burger community who are stereotyped as, eating, drinking people, have these wild parties, get drunk, get in fights, sleep with each other's spouses. So it was just this. But the main thing there was he wrote like a drunken Sri Lankan uncle. He didn't write as elegantly as Ondaatje or as beautifully as Ramesh Gunasekara or as, insightfully as Selvadurai. But he wrote like a Sri Lankan uncle telling you a story, and that meant a lot to me because I knew I can't write as elegantly as Ondaatje, but I can definitely try writing like a drunken uncle. So I think those were the guys who started us on this journey. But now you have genre writing like Amanda J and Yudhanje Vijayaratna. Amanda J writes Jayatis, she writes thrillers, and she's been published in LA, and Yudhanje writes science fiction. And there's Vajra Chandrasena who was nominated for the Hugo and the Nebula. I think he won one of those prizes, The Saint of Bright Doors. So these are young writers who are not going to the traditional literary path of writing literary stuff and winning Oscars. They're going genre fiction. But of course, there's no shortage of literary accolades as well. B.V. Ganeshanandan, Brotherless Night, has picked up every prize there is. And Shankari Chandran won the Miles Franklin. And these are all, women writing, Tamil women writing that side of the war story. One is like a very insider story, one outsider story. But these voices were not, it was mainly, Sinhala and Berger men writing stories back in the 80s and 90s. But now we have stories coming from all parts. And I'd like to hear more stories coming out of the war.
Right.
And even out of the last 10 years. So, I can teach a course on this, and I probably have already. But look up Sri Lankan writers. I think we're having a moment. And hopefully more and more Sri Lankans end up writing, and it doesn't have to be literary stuff that wins prize. It can just be there's plenty
Right.
of material
Exactly.
here.
It's anyway great news for the whole region. So my last question for today's program, Shehan, is if you could go back in time and give your younger self one piece of advice about writing, what would it be?
Letter to younger self. I haven't done that game. Well, let me think. So I'd have to go in Chinaman. There is. I don't want to give too much away, but there is WG, the narrator, and there's his son called Garfield, who's a bit of a. They have a bit of a testy relationship. I think this father-son daddy issue thing is there in both books, and maybe that's
Right.
true of our generation that grew up with MTV and our parents' generation coming out of independence who had more conservative values. But I think so. This Garfield character, people have accused him of resembling me a bit because he's this bass player, long-haired, tattooed guy who very lazy and has one hit and lives off that. And anyway, he features in Chinaman, and he says, if I met my younger self, I would tell that idiot to smoke less and to practice more. And I can't really go. I think that's pretty good advice. I smoke less and practice more. Yeah, that's pretty good advice for anyone. But yeah, but you go through your journeys. I mean, look, we're here. You got to say we're still here, and whatever mistakes we made when we were kids, we should forgive ourselves. So forgive your younger self as well, because time travel has not been invented yet. So yeah.
Right. So on that note, I really like to thank you so much for your time. It's really an honor for you to have in my platform. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thanks.